A wrong number usually ends with an awkward apology. For Amelie T. Danielson, it ended with a revolution. Bleeding out on her own kitchen floor, hiding from a decorated detective who had just pulled the trigger, she tried to call her father for help. Her vision was failing. She misdialed one digit. That call didn't go to her father. It went to the private line of William Lund, the most feared man in Scandinavia. A phone that hadn't rung in 3 years, not since the night his daughter was murdered. What happens when a dying woman's voice resurrects a ghost from a kingpin's past? The answer is beautifully brutal and irreversible. This is the story of the wrong number that started a war. The sound of a gunshot in a quiet apartment is louder than you'd think. It doesn't echo like in the movies. It detonates. A sharp, violent crack that punches through the air and leaves your ears ringing with a high-pitched whine that won't stop. Amelie T. Danielson heard that sound before she felt the impact. Then the burning started. Not pain, not yet, just an impossible heat spreading across her abdomen like someone had pressed a white-hot iron against her skin. She looked down. The cream-colored blouse she'd worn to school that morning was turning dark. Wet, red blooming across the fabric in a widening stain that seemed too vivid to be real. She crumpled to the hardwood floor, her legs giving out beneath her. The world tilted sideways. Her breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. Jesus, Amelie. Martin Lawson's voice cut through the ringing in her ears. Calm, almost disappointed. That was the worst part about Martin. He didn't rage like the abusers in the documentaries she'd watched late at night, trying to understand what she'd become. He was a detective with the Oslo Police Department, a decorated officer who knew exactly how to manipulate a scene, how to control a narrative, how to make a victim look unstable. Usually, he was meticulous. Tonight, he had lost control. Amelie pressed her hand to her stomach, unable to speak. The blood was warm, poolsing between her fingers with each heartbeat. She looked up at him through swimming vision. He was adjusting his badge, checking his reflection in the darkened window, as if she were an inconvenience rather than his fiancée of 4 years. I have to call this in, Martin said, stepping over her pooling blood. Self-inflicted, you were distraught, unstable. Everyone at the school knows you've been under stress. He crouched down, tilted his head with that look he gave suspects in interrogation rooms. I tried to stop you, but I was too late. That's the story, Amelie. Do you understand? He stood, straightened his uniform jacket, and walked toward the bathroom. I need to wash my hands. Don't bleed out before I figure out the staging. The bathroom door closed. The lock clicked. Amelie waited. She counted 15 seconds by the throbbing of her pulse in her ears, each beat weaker than the last. When she was certain he wasn't coming back immediately, she dragged herself across the floor. The pain was transcendent, beyond burning, beyond stabbing. It was liquid fire spreading through her entire torso. She knew what was happening. She'd taken basic first aid courses as a teacher, hemorrhagic shock, internal bleeding. Without pressure, without help, she had maybe 20 minutes, but she couldn't call an ambulance. Martin had friends in every emergency room in the city. They would call him. They always called him. She needed her father. Henrik was the only one who had never bought Martin's perfect cop persona. Amelie crawled toward her purse, knocked off the kitchen counter during the struggle. Her phone was inside. She dragged it close, wedged her body against the kitchen island, trembling violently. Her fingers were slick with blood as she fished the phone out. 10:17 p.m. She unlocked it with shaking hands. The screen kept blurring, her vision darkening at the edges. She tried to dial her father's number from memory. She had deleted his contact because Martin checked her phone every night. +40, 722. Her thumb slipped on the blood-smeared glass. She hit 7 instead of 6. She didn't notice. She just needed someone to know, someone to understand that the man in the bathroom was going to erase her. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. Amelie's head lolled back against the cabinet, her breathing becoming shallow, rapid little gasps. The phone was slipping from her grip when... Click. Silence on the other end. No greeting, no voice, just the faint sound of breathing. Papa, Amelie's voice cracked, barely a whisper. He shot me. Martin shot me. I'm bleeding. I don't think I can. Who is this? The voice was low, cold, rough like gravel scraped across steel. Not her father, not anyone she knew. Amelie's chest tightened with fresh panic. Wrong number. She'd called the wrong number. I'm sorry, I need help. He's going to kill me. He's a detective, he's going to make it look like. Where are you? The voice cut through her rambling with surgical precision. Who are you? Where are you? There was something in that tone. Not kindness, not sympathy, but something absolute. A command from someone who expected obedience because refusal was not a concept that existed in his world. Amelie gave him the address. She didn't know why. Shock, maybe, or the desperate animal instinct that even the wrong stranger was better than dying alone. Don't hang up, the voice said, then quieter to someone else in the background. Send everything, now. The bathroom door opened. Martin's footsteps approached, unhurried. Amelie dropped the phone, letting it slide under the edge of the cabinet where he wouldn't see it. She closed her eyes, playing dead, praying the stranger on the other end was real and not a hallucination born of blood loss. She heard Martin crouch beside her, heard him sigh like she'd ruined his evening. And then she waited. 12 minutes later, the silence of the apartment complex shattered. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of the front door exploding inward, the lock obliterated by a battering ram or a boot. Amelie couldn't tell which. Her eyes flew open, her body jerking with what little adrenaline she had left. Martin spun toward the sound, his hand going to his service weapon. What the? But the footsteps were already inside. Not one person. Many, heavy boots moving with tactical precision across the hardwood. Oslo police, identify yourself, Martin shouted, his detective's authority ringing through the apartment. The response was not what he expected. Put the weapon down. The voice was the same one from the phone, that grinding, gravel-dark tone that didn't ask, it decreed. Step away from her. I'm a detective with the Oslo PD, Martin barked. This is a crime scene. You need to. I know exactly who you are, Detective Lawson. The voice was closer now, moving through the apartment with the inevitability of a glacier. And you have 3 seconds to put your gun on the floor before I have my men remove your hands. Amelie turned her head, her vision swimming. Through the archway leading to the living room, she saw them. Men in black tactical gear, faces hard and expressionless, spreading through her apartment like shadows given form. And at the center of them, stepping into the kitchen light, William Lund. Amelie knew that face. Everyone in Oslo knew that face, though usually only from surveillance photos in investigative journalism pieces or blurred images on crime documentaries. The Reaper. The tattooed kingpin who controlled everything from the docks to the government offices, a man who had walked out of courtrooms untouched more times than anyone could count. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her yearly salary, ink crawling up his neck and disappearing beneath his collar. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes, cold, blue, and devastatingly empty, swept across the room, cataloging everything in an instant. Those eyes landed on her. For a moment, something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, not quite recognition, but something ancient and agonizing, like he was staring at a ghost he'd been trying to forget. You called the wrong number, William said quietly, his gaze never leaving her face. But I'm here anyway. He stepped toward her, and Martin moved to block him. Don't, William said, and 2 of his men had Martin on the ground before the detective could even raise his weapon, his arms wrenched behind his back, his face pressed against the blood-stained floor. William knelt beside Amelie, his movements careful, controlled. Up close, she could see the scars on his knuckles, the faded tattoos on his fingers, the weight of something terrible living behind his eyes. Stay awake, he said, his voice rough but no longer cold. You're not dying in this piece of shit's apartment, not tonight. Amelie tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The darkness was rising again, pulling her under. The last thing she heard before the world went black was William's voice, low and lethal, directed at Martin. If she dies, You'll pray I'm merciful enough to just kill you. Okay, pause for a second. I need to know something. Where are you right now? What are you doing while you're listening to this? Because I'm imagining some of you are folding laundry, some are pretending to work, and at least one person is listening to this in the bathroom. If that's your respect, no shame here. Leave a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. And if you're invested in watching Shauna absolutely demolish everyone who wronged her, do me a favor, hit like and subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and you're not going to want to miss them. All right, let's get back to it. The argument had started over something small. It always did. Amelie had stayed late at school to help a student with a chemistry project, and she'd forgotten to text Martin. By the time she walked through the door at 7:30 p.m., he was already 3 drinks deep, standing in the kitchen with that look on his face, the one that made her stomach drop. Where were you? She'd explained, apologized, promised it wouldn't happen again, but Martin wasn't listening. He was packing, his jaw tight, his hand flexing and unflexing around his glass. He started listing her failures, her disrespect, the ways she embarrassed him in front of his colleagues at the department gala last month. His voice never rose above conversational volume. That was what made it worse. When she tried to leave the kitchen, he grabbed her wrist. When she pulled away, something in him snapped. The gun appeared so fast she didn't have time to process it. One moment his hand was empty, the next his service weapon was leveled at her chest. Amelie froze, her breath catching. Martin had never pulled his gun before. Not at home, not at her. You think you can just walk away from me? His voice was eerily calm. You think I'm like the other men you could manipulate? I see through you, Amelie. I've always seen through you. Martin, please. The gunshot cut her off. For a fraction of a second, she thought he'd missed. Then the heat bloomed across her abdomen and she understood. He hadn't missed at all. She hit the floor hard, her vision exploding with white sparks. The ceiling came into sharp focus above her, the pendant light she'd picked out at IKEA 2 years ago now swinging slightly from the vibration of her fall. Martin's face appeared above her, blocking out the light. He stared down at her with clinical detachment, like he was examining evidence at a crime scene. Shit, he muttered, not panicked, just annoyed. He holstered his weapon and stepped over her, moving to the sink. Amelie heard the water running, heard him washing his hands with methodical care. She tried to move, to crawl, but her body wouldn't respond. The blood was spreading beneath her, warm and sticky, soaking into the waistband of her jeans. Martin returned, crouching beside her. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, checking her pulse with the professional efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Still strong, he said, more to himself than to her. We can work with this. He stood and surveyed the kitchen, his detective's mind already working through the angles. He moved her purse from the counter to the floor near her hand. He took her phone out, unlocked it with her fingerprint while she was too weak to resist, and opened her messages. He began typing something, then stopped, deleted it, started again. Suicide note, he explained conversationally. You've been depressed, everyone at your school knows it. The principal mentioned it to me last week, said you seemed distant, distracted. I was worried about you, tried to get you help, but tonight you spiraled. He looked down at her, and for just a moment, something like regret flickered across his face. I'm sorry it came to this, Amelie, but you never knew when to stop pushing. He placed the phone near her hand, then stood and walked to the bathroom. I need to think this through, he called over his shoulder. Make sure the trajectory makes sense. Don't go anywhere. The bathroom door closed. The lock clicked, and Amelie, bleeding out on her own kitchen floor, reached for the phone with trembling, blood-slicked fingers. William Lund didn't believe in ghosts, but he kept one anyway. The phone sat in the bottom drawer of his desk at the estate, wrapped in a silk handkerchief the color of forget-me-nots. He hadn't touched it in 3 years, not since the night they found Sophia's body in the harbor with 2 bullets in her chest and her hands bound with wire. The police had returned her personal effects in a cardboard box. He'd burned most of it, but the phone, her private line, the number only he had ever called, he'd kept. He told himself it was sentiment, a father's weakness, but really it was penance. A reminder that in his world, even kings couldn't protect the people they loved. The office was quiet tonight. Just William, a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking, and financial reports he wasn't reading. His second-in-command, Eric, had left an hour ago. The estate was locked down, 12 men on rotation through the grounds. Everything was as it should be. Then the phone rang. Not his personal cell, not the business line. The sound came from the desk drawer, muffled but unmistakable, a ringtone he'd programmed himself years ago, Sophia's favorite song. William's hand froze halfway to his glass. For 3 heartbeats, he didn't move, couldn't move. The ringing continued, insistent, impossible. He opened the drawer with hands that didn't shake. He'd trained himself too well for that, but his chest felt tight, compressed. The phone's screen glowed in the darkness, an unknown number displayed across the cracked glass. Unknown, not Sophia, of course not Sophia. He almost didn't answer, almost threw the phone across the room and poured himself another drink and pretended the last 30 seconds hadn't happened. But William Lund hadn't built an empire by ignoring the impossible. He answered, said nothing, just listened. The voice that came through was barely a whisper, choked with pain and terror. "Papa, he shot me. Martin shot me. I'm bleeding. I don't think I can." William's entire body went rigid. The voice was young, female, shattered. It sounded exactly like Sophia had sounded in his nightmares, the ones where he arrived at the harbor 30 minutes earlier, where he pulled her out of the water still breathing, still calling for him. "Who is this?" His voice came out harder than he intended, sharp enough to cut. "I'm sorry, I need help. He's going to kill me. He's a detective, he's going to make it look like." A detective, Martin. The details filtered through the roaring in William's ears. This wasn't Sophia. This was a wrong number, some poor woman bleeding out while calling for her father. But the voice. God, the voice. "Where are you?" William was already standing, already moving toward the door. Who are you?" "Where are you?" He heard her breathing, rapid and shallow. Heard the wet sound of blood in her lungs. He'd heard that sound before, kneeling beside Sophia's body while the police tried to pull him away. She gave him an address in Grunerlocke, a 4th-floor apartment. Martin Lawson. William knew that name, a decorated detective with the Oslo PD, clean record, commendations for bravery. The kind of cop who testified against William's organization in court and walked away untouched because the bastard was too smart to be dirty. "Don't hang up," William said, gesturing sharply at the security monitor. Within seconds, Eric appeared in the doorway, eyes alert. William covered the phone. "Send everything to this address. Now, full tactical. I want the building locked down in 10 minutes. Eric didn't ask questions. He never did. He disappeared, already speaking rapidly into his radio. William put the phone back to his ear. He heard shuffling, a male voice in the background, calm, controlled, discussing staging and trajectories like he was arranging furniture. Then silence. The line didn't disconnect, but the woman wasn't speaking anymore. William listened to her breathing grow fainter. Listened to the detective moving around what was clearly a crime scene in progress, and he made a decision that would burn half the city to the ground. He walked to the armory, pulled his coat from the rack, and checked the Glock he kept in his shoulder holster. "I'm coming," he said into the phone, even though he didn't know if she could still hear him. "Hold on." The woman who answered Sophia's phone was a stranger, but her voice was a ghost he couldn't ignore. And William Lund had failed to save his daughter once. He wouldn't fail twice. The convoy of black SUVs rolled through Grunerlocke like a funeral procession, silent except for the low rumble of engines. No sirens, no flashing lights, just 3 vehicles moving with surgical precision through the narrow streets, parking in formation around the apartment building at Møllergata 47. Residents who happened to glance out their windows quickly looked away. In Oslo, you learned to recognize certain things, certain vehicles, certain men, and you learned that curiosity could be expensive. William stepped out of the lead vehicle before it fully stopped. Eric was already coordinating the perimeter, his voice a low murmur into his radio. North and south exits covered, stairwell secured, no one in or out. Fourth floor, apartment 4B, William said, moving toward the entrance. The detective is inside. He's armed. Rules of engagement, Eric asked, falling into step beside him. If he reaches for his weapon, put him down, but I want him alive if possible. William's jaw tightened. I have questions for him. 6 men followed them into the building, moving with the fluid coordination of a unit that had breached doors together 100 times before. They took the stairs in formation, their footsteps barely audible on the concrete. When they reached the 4th floor, William raised his hand. Everyone stopped. He could hear voices through the door of 4B, the detective's voice, calm and measured, talking to himself about angles and powder residue. William felt something cold settle in his chest. The man was staging a suicide while his victim bled out 3 meters away. William didn't knock. He gestured to Magnus, a former military operator who'd been with the organization for a decade. Magnus drove his boot into the door just below the lock. The frame splintered with a crack that echoed through the hallway, and the door exploded inward. They flooded the apartment. 2 men swept left into the bedroom, 2 more moved right toward the bathroom. William walked straight ahead into the kitchen, Eric covering his 6. Martin Lawson spun around, his hand instinctively dropping toward his holstered weapon. He froze when he saw the tactical team, saw the weapons trained on him, saw William Lund standing in his kitchen like death in a tailored suit. Oslo police, Martin's voice held authority even now, impressive under the circumstances. Identify yourself, this is a crime scene. William didn't answer. His eyes had already found her. Amelie was on the floor near the kitchen island, her body curled into itself, one hand pressed weakly against her stomach. The blood had spread across the hardwood in a dark pool that reflected the overhead light. Her face was bone-white, her lips tinged blue. But her eyes were open, barely, tracking William's movement with the glazed awareness of someone hovering at the edge of consciousness. I know exactly who you are, Detective Lawson, William said, his voice quiet and laced with something lethal. And you have 3 seconds to put your weapon on the floor before I have my men remove your hands. Martin's face cycled through several expressions, confusion, recognition, calculation. You can't be here. This is a police matter. I'm calling for backup. 2 seconds. Eric's weapon lifted fractionally. So did Magnus's. The message was clear. Martin slowly removed his service weapon with 2 fingers and placed it on the counter. This is a mistake. She's unstable. She shot herself. I was trying to. Quiet. William crossed to Amelie and knelt beside her, his movements careful. Up close, the wound was worse than he'd imagined. Through and through, but the exit wound suggested the bullet had tumbled, tearing through tissue. She was hemorrhaging internally. Minutes, not hours. Stay awake, William said, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. You're not dying in this piece of shit's apartment. Not tonight. Amelie's lips moved, trying to form words. No sound came out. William looked up at Eric. Get the car ready. We're taking her to the estate. Dr. Arneson will meet us there. You can't remove her from a crime scene, Martin said, his detective's brain still trying to control the narrative. That's kidnapping. I'll have every cop in Oslo. William stood and turned to face him. The movement was slow, deliberate. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. If she dies, you'll pray I'm merciful enough to just kill you. He slid his arms beneath Amelie, one under her shoulders, one under her knees, and lifted her with surprising care. She weighed nothing, a bird-boned thing already half gone. Her head lolled against his chest, and for just a moment, with her eyes closed and her dark hair falling across his arm, she looked exactly like Sophia had looked. William carried her toward the door. Martin started to move forward, and instantly 2 weapons tracked him. Stay, Eric said simply. William walked past the detective without another glance, carrying the dying woman out of her own apartment, while Martin Lawson stood powerless in the ruins of his perfect crime. surrounded by armed men who answered to a different kind of law entirely. Amélie woke to whiteness. Not the harsh, fluorescent white of a hospital, but something softer, cream-colored walls, gauzy curtains filtering pale morning light, Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than her monthly salary. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was dead. Then the pain reminded her otherwise. It started as a dull ache in her abdomen and bloomed into something sharper when she tried to sit up. She gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. Bandages. Professional medical dressing, the kind that required actual skill to apply. An IV line ran from her left arm to a stand beside the bed, clear fluid dripping steadily. "Don't move." Amélie's head snapped toward the voice, and she immediately regretted the sudden movement. William Lund sat in a leather chair near the window, still wearing the charcoal suit from last night, though his jacket was draped over the armrest and his sleeves were rolled to his elbows. Tattoos covered his forearms, intricate Nordic patterns interwoven with something darker, more violent. In daylight, he looked even more dangerous than he had in her apartment. "Where am I?" Her voice came out hoarse, damaged. "My estate, 20 kilometers outside Oslo." William leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You've been unconscious for 14 hours. Dr. Arneson removed the bullet and repaired the internal damage. You were lucky, it missed your major organs by centimeters." Amélie's mind was struggling to catch up. Estate, doctor, 14 hours. Martin is currently sitting in his apartment, trying to explain to his superiors why half his kitchen is a biohazard zone and why several witnesses reported armed men removing a woman from the building. William's expression didn't change. "He's calling it a kidnapping, says you were taken by unknown assailants." "Why did you save me?" The question came out before Amélie could stop it. "You don't know me. I called the wrong number. You could have just hung up." William was quiet for a long moment. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her, hands in his pockets. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. 3 years ago, my daughter was murdered. Sophia, she was 19. He paused, and Amélie saw his shoulders tense beneath the white dress shirt. "They took her to send me a message, bound her hands, put 2 bullets in her chest, threw her in the harbor like garbage." Amélie's breath caught. She didn't know what to say. What could anyone say to that? "I found out 6 hours after it happened. 6 hours she was in the water while I was in a meeting, making deals, counting money." William turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw past the cold exterior to the devastation underneath. "I've spent 3 years asking myself what her last moments were like, if she called for me, if she was scared." He crossed the room, standing at the foot of her bed. "When you called last night, you were gasping, bleeding, calling for your father, your voice." He stopped, his jaw working. "You sounded exactly like I imagined she sounded, alone, terrified, dying." Amélie felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize." William's voice turned sharp. "You did nothing wrong. That detective, that piece of shit who swore an oath to protect people, he's the one who should be sorry, and he will be." "He'll come after me," Amélie whispered. "He has the entire police department. He'll say I'm unstable, that I'm a kidnapping victim." "He can say whatever he wants." William's eyes were cold again, calculating. "But he made a mistake last night. He pulled that trigger thinking he was untouchable, thinking his badge was armor." A thin smile crossed his face, and it was the most terrifying thing Amélie had ever seen. "It's not, and I'm going to prove it." Amélie looked at the man standing before her, the tattooed kingpin, the crime lord, the reaper who'd walked into her apartment and carried her out like she mattered. She should be afraid of him. By every rational measure, she should be begging to go to the police, to the hospital, anywhere but here. But the police hadn't saved her. Her fiancé was the police. "What happens now?" she asked. William met her gaze, and she saw the same ghost haunting his eyes that she felt haunting her own. "Now," he said quietly, "you heal. And then we make sure Martin Lawson understands that some debts can only be paid in blood." Martin Lawson understood narrative control. In his 15 years with the Oslo Police Department, he'd learned that truth was malleable, that evidence could be interpreted a dozen different ways, and that the person who spoke first usually won. By the time the sun rose over his blood-stained apartment, he'd already constructed his story. He sat across from Chief Inspector Torson in the downtown precinct, his face a careful mask of anguish and professional concern. The chief was 62, a career bureaucrat more worried about optics than justice. Perfect. She'd been unstable for months, Martin said, his voice raw with manufactured emotion. Depressed, paranoid. I tried to get her into therapy, but she refused. Last night, she threatened to hurt herself. I tried to talk her down, and that's when they broke in. Torson leaned forward. They. Armed men, tactical gear, at least 6 of them. Martin gestured to the photographs spread across the desk, his shattered door, the blood pool, the staging he'd been in the middle of when William's team arrived. They took her. I tried to stop them, but I was outnumbered. They had automatic weapons. Did you recognize any of them? Martin paused, letting the silence build. The man leading them, I've seen him in surveillance photos, William Lund. The name hung in the air like a curse. Every cop in Oslo knew that name. The Reaper. The one who walked out of every investigation untouched, who corrupted judges and bought witnesses, who turned the northern docks into his personal kingdom. Torson's expression darkened. You're certain? Positive. Martin pulled out his phone, showed the chief a blurry photo he'd managed to capture before they'd taken Amelie. It showed William's back, the distinctive tattoos on his neck visible even in the poor lighting. He's got her, sir, and I don't think he plans to let her go. What Martin didn't mention was the phone call. The wrong number that had brought William to his door. That detail complicated the narrative, made it seem less like a random kidnapping and more like something else. So he buried it. Torson stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. This is a delicate situation, Detective. Lund has connections. City council, parliament, half the lawyers in the country. If we move against him without concrete evidence. She's a kidnapping victim, Martin interrupted, letting urgency bleed into his voice. Every hour we wait is another hour she's in the hands of a violent criminal. With respect, sir, this isn't about politics. It's about saving an innocent woman. The chief turned, and Martin saw the calculation in his eyes. The optics of a decorated detective's fiancé held hostage by Oslo's most notorious crime lord. The media would crucify the department if they didn't act. What do you need? Torson asked. Martin had been waiting for that question. Full tactical authorization, surveillance on all known Lund properties, and I want it made clear to every officer in this city that William Lund is armed, dangerous, and not to be approached without backup, if he resists arrest. Standard protocols apply, Torson said carefully. He couldn't authorize a shoot-on-sight order explicitly, but he could create the conditions where one became inevitable. I'll have a warrant drawn up within the hour. His estate, his businesses, everything. Martin stood, shook the chief's hand. Thank you, sir. I just want her home safe. As he left the office, Martin allowed himself a small smile. Within hours, every cop in Oslo would be looking for William Lund. The warrant would give him legal cover to raid the estate. And when they found Amelie, traumatized, possibly brainwashed by her captor, her testimony wouldn't matter. She'd be written off as a victim suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. He pulled out his phone and opened an encrypted messaging app. The number belonged to Christian Hagen, a lieutenant with the Emergency Response Unit. They'd served together years ago, before Martin made detective. Hagen owed him favors, the kind of favors men didn't talk about. Lund has her. Need your team ready to breach the estate. Rules of engagement, if he's armed, put him down. No warnings. The response came within seconds. Understood. Give me the green light and he's done. Martin pocketed his phone and headed for his car. The blue wall was closing in around William Lund, and when it came down, everyone inside would be buried. He just needed to make sure Amelie didn't survive to tell the real story. Amelie spent her first week at the estate learning to walk again without feeling like her insides were tearing apart. By the second week, she was packing the halls like a caged animal, her teacher's mind starving for something to do besides heal and worry. That's when William found her in the library, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the grounds, watching his men conduct perimeter checks with military precision. "You're analyzing them," William said from the doorway. It wasn't a question. Amelie didn't turn around. 4-man rotation. They switch positions every 2 hours, but the patterns are predictable. The north gate has a 30-second gap when the patrol's shifts overlap. Someone disciplined could exploit that. William stepped into the room, intrigued. Most people see armed guards and get scared. You see weaknesses. "I taught high school chemistry for 6 years. You learn to think 3 steps ahead when you're managing 30 teenagers with access to Bunsen burners." She finally turned to face him. "Besides, I've had nothing to do but watch and think." "You're bored." "I'm terrified," Amelie corrected. "But boredom makes the terror worse." William studied her for a moment. She'd regained some color in the past 2 weeks, though she still moved carefully, protecting her healing wound. But it was her eyes that had changed most. The glazed shock had burned away, replaced by something sharper, more aware. "Come with me," he said. He led her through the estate to his office, a room she hadn't been allowed to enter before. The walls were lined with monitors showing security feeds from a dozen locations, warehouses, shipping yards, restaurants that were clearly fronts for something else. A large desk dominated the center, covered with ledgers, burner phones, and a map of Oslo marked with colored pins. "You wanted something to do," William said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "So let's see how smart you actually are." Over the next 3 hours, he taught her the architecture of his empire. Not the violent parts, not yet, but the infrastructure. How cargo moved through the port with the right customs officers paid off. How shell companies laundered money through legitimate businesses. How information flowed through networks of informants, each one knowing only their small piece of the puzzle. Amelie absorbed it with the focus she used to apply to lesson planning, asking questions that cut straight to the vulnerabilities in each system. William found himself explaining things he'd never bothered to articulate before, simply because she had a way of reframing his world through a lens he'd never considered. "You're shipping manifests," she said, pointing to a spreadsheet on his laptop. "You're using sequential invoice numbers. Any forensic accountant would catch that pattern in 15 minutes. William raised an eyebrow. "And your solution?" "Randomize them. Use a generator that pulls from multiple ranges. Make it look like natural business variation instead of systematic fraud." She met his gaze. "I ran the chemistry department's budget for 4 years. I know how audits work." He leaned back in his chair, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "You should have been a criminal." "I was engaged to one," Amelie said quietly. "I just didn't realize it until he shot me." The moment hung between them. Then William pushed a folder across the desk. "This is everything I have on Martin Lawson. Personnel file, commendations, sealed internal affairs complaints that disappeared. Read it. Tell me what you see." Amelie opened the folder and began reading. 5 minutes later, she looked up, her expression cold. "He's done this before." 3 complaints over 7 years. 2 from fellow officers, 1 from a woman he dated briefly. All buried. The system protects him. The system always protects men like him. That's why the system needs to be circumvented. William stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "Martin is building a case against me. By now, every cop in Oslo has my picture and orders to bring me in. He's using his badge to weaponize the law." "So what do we do?" Amelie asked. William turned to face her. "We teach you how to fight back, not with the law he owns that battlefield, but with information, strategy, understanding how power actually moves in this city." He crossed back to the desk. "You're a teacher, Amelie. You know how to break complex ideas into simple lessons. Apply that skill here." Amelie looked at the map of Oslo, at the pins marking territories and operations, at the web of connections William had built over decades. She thought about Martin sitting in some precinct, spinning his lies, using his badge like a shield. "Where do we start?" she asked. William's smile turned sharp. "Lesson 1, Every institution has a price. We just need to find out what your detective can't afford to pay. The meeting took place in a shipping container at the El Nabru freight terminal, far enough from downtown that no one would ask questions about who came and went. Martin arrived alone, as instructed, parking his unmarked police vehicle behind a stack of rusted containers that hadn't moved in months. The air smelled like diesel and saltwater rot. Viktor Kozlov was waiting inside, flanked by two men who looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts and violence. The Russian had been trying to move into Oslo for 3 years, but William Lund's stranglehold on the ports made expansion nearly impossible, which made him exactly the kind of desperate that Martin could use. "Detective Lawson," Viktor said, his accent thick but his English precise. "You said you had business. I am listening." Martin didn't waste time on pleasantries. "William Lund has something that belongs to me. I want it back. You want him out of your way. We can help each other." Viktor's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "Lund is untouchable. Every time someone tries to move against him, they disappear. Bodies in the fjord if they're found at all." "He's not untouchable. He's just been playing a game where no one knows the rules." Martin pulled a flash drive from his jacket pocket and set it on the metal table between them. "Those are the architectural blueprints for Lund's estate. Security layouts, guard rotations, blind spots in the camera coverage, everything you need to breach the property." Viktor stared at the drive like it might explode. "And where did a detective acquire such information?" "The building permits are public record. The security details I got from an informant." Martin's lie was smooth, practiced. In truth, he'd called in favors from the city planning department and cross-referenced them with surveillance photos his team had taken during reconnaissance. What matters is that it's accurate. "And what do you want in return?" "There's a woman inside. Amelie Danielson, mid-30s, dark hair, about 160 centimeters. She's a hostage. When you breach, I want her extracted alive and delivered to me. I don't care what happens to Lund or his men, but she needs to survive." Viktor picked up the flash drive, turning it over in his thick fingers. "You want us to do your dirty work while you stay clean. Convenient. I want Lund's empire broken and my fiancé safe. You want access to the northern ports. This gets us both what we need." Martin leaned forward. "But there's a timeline. I'm preparing a police raid for 72 hours from now. If you're going to move, it has to be before then. Otherwise, Lund goes into custody and you lose your window." "Why not just raid him yourself?" "Because raids have rules, warrants, witnesses, body cameras." Martin's voice dropped. "What I need to happen to William Lund can't happen with my badge on. But if a rival organization attacks his estate and people die in the crossfire, that's just the criminal underworld eating itself. No one investigates too hard." Viktor smiled, revealing gold teeth. "You want us to kill him?" "I want him neutralized, permanently, and I want it to look like a gang war, not a police execution." Martin stood. "You have 48 hours. After that, I raid the estate with the emergency response unit, and whatever's left of Lund goes into a cell. Your choice which way this plays out." Viktor studied Martin for a long moment, then pocketed the flash drive. "I will need to verify this information. If it's real, we have a deal. But if you're setting me up, detective, I will make sure pieces of you wash up on every beach from here to Tromsø." "It's real," Martin said. "And when this is over, Oslo's ports belong to you. All I ask is that the woman comes out alive." They shook hands, and Martin felt the same cold satisfaction he'd felt 100 times before when closing a case. This was just another problem to solve, another narrative to control. Viktor would attack the estate. In the chaos, William would die defending his fortress. Amelie would be traumatized, compliant, easier to manage. And Martin would emerge as the hero who'd been trying to save her all along. As he walked back to his car, Martin's phone buzzed. A message from Hagen, "ERU team ready, waiting on your green light." Martin typed back, "Stand by. Let me flush the target out first." He pocketed the phone and drove away from the terminal, already rehearsing the statement he'd give to the media when it was over. The grieving detective who'd lost his fiancée in a tragic gang shootout. The hero cop who'd tried everything to save her. The system would believe him. The system always did. Behind him, in the shipping container, Victor Kozlov opened a secure laptop and began studying the blueprints of William Lund's fortress, already planning how to bring the Reaper to his knees. They came at 3:47 a.m., the hour when even trained soldiers fight their biology to stay alert. The first explosion took out the north gate, a shaped charge that turned reinforced steel into shrapnel and sent 2 of William's guards flying backward into the gravel drive. The second explosion followed 3 seconds later at the east perimeter, a diversionary blast that drew half the security team away from the main house. Amelie was in the library when the windows shattered. She hit the floor on instinct, her healing wound screaming in protest, her ears ringing from the concussive force. Through the smoke and chaos, she heard Eric's voice over the estate's intercom system. "Breach! North and east gates compromised. Multiple hostiles inbound." William appeared in the doorway, already moving, a Glock in one hand and a radio in the other. "Stay down," he commanded, but Amelie was already crawling toward the desk where he'd shown her the emergency protocols just 2 days ago. He'd made her memorize them. Now she understood why. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "At least 15, professional." William's jaw was tight. "This isn't the police. Someone gave them the blueprints." Martin. The realization hit Amelie like a physical blow. He'd made a deal with someone worse than himself. Gunfire erupted from the grounds, the sharp crack of rifles mixing with the deeper boom of shotguns. William spoke rapidly into the radio, coordinating his men, repositioning them to create a kill box in the main courtyard. Amelie watched him transform from the man who'd taught her about shell companies into something else entirely. The Reaper, cold and efficient and absolutely lethal. "Fall back to the inner perimeter," William ordered into the radio. "Let them come to us. Eric, where are?" The explosion came from directly below them in the basement level. The floor buckled, and William was thrown backward into the hallway. Amelie screamed his name, scrambling toward him through the smoke. He was on his back, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, his eyes unfocused. "William," she grabbed his face, forced him to look at her. "Stay with me." He tried to sit up and collapsed, his left leg bent at an angle that made Amelie's stomach turn. Shrapnel from the blast had torn through his calf, and bone was visible through the shredded fabric of his pants. He was breathing hard, his face pale with shock. "Get out," he managed. "There's a tunnel in the wine cellar. Take Eric and—" "I'm not leaving you." Amelie grabbed his radio from where it had fallen. Her hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. "Eric, this is Amelie. William's down. Second floor library. I need 2 men here now." Static, then Eric's voice, tight with stress. "We're pinned in the east wing. They're pushing hard. I can't." "Then I'm coming to you." Amelie looked at William, at the blood pooling beneath his leg, at the way his eyes were starting to lose focus. She thought about the maps he'd shown her, the guard positions, the blind spots she'd identified. She thought about 30 teenagers with Bunsen burners and how you controlled chaos by understanding it. "Amelie, no." William tried to grab her arm, but his grip was weak. She pulled the weapon from his shoulder holster, a Glock identical to the one he'd been carrying. 3 weeks ago, she'd never held a gun. Now she checked the magazine with movements William had drilled into her during their sessions, confirming it was loaded. "You taught me how your world works," she said, meeting his eyes. "Now I'm going to show you I learned." She stood, grabbed the radio, and moved to the doorway. Through the smoke, she could see muzzle flashes in the courtyard below. She could hear boots pounding up the main staircase. Victor's men, coming for the heart of the estate. Coming for her. Amelie pressed the radio transmit button. "All units, this is Amelie Danielson. The Reaper is down, but I'm still standing. And if anyone wants to reach him, they go through me first." She took a breath, channeling every ounce of authority she'd ever used to control a classroom full of rebellious teenagers. "Eric, I need a status report. Now." "East wing holding. Barely. 4 men left." "Pull back to the main hall. Funnel them through the gallery corridor. It's a choke point. I'm moving to William's armory." I'll provide support from the second-floor landing. A pause. Ma'am, with respect, you're not. I'm the only one who can walk right now, Amelie interrupted. So unless you have a better plan, you follow my orders. Understood. Another pause, longer this time. Then, understood, moving to main hall. Amelie moved through the smoke-filled corridor, the gun heavy in her hands but her purpose crystalline. Behind her, William was bleeding out. Below her, men were coming to finish what Martin had started. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a criminal. She was a high school chemistry teacher who'd survived a bullet and learned to think like a predator. And tonight, that would have to be enough. The gunfire stopped at 5:23 a.m. The silence that followed was worse than the chaos. Thick and ringing, broken only by the crackle of fires burning in 3 different wings of the estate. Amelie stood in the main hall, her clothes soaked with blood that wasn't hers, the Glock still warm in her hand. Around her, Eric and the surviving guards were securing the last of Victor's men. Most were dead. The rest wished they were. Victor himself lay in the courtyard, his chest torn open by the claymore mine Amelie had triggered when his team tried to breach the gallery corridor. She'd learned about directional explosives in a 40-minute crash course from Eric. Turned out the principles weren't that different from a particularly volatile chemistry experiment. She was walking back toward the library to check on William when she heard the sirens. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Her first thought was ambulances, but the pattern was wrong. Too aggressive. Too coordinated. Eric appeared at her side, his face grim. Police, full tactical response. They're surrounding the property. How long do we have? Minutes, maybe less. He gestured toward the east wing. There's still the tunnel. We can get you and William out before. No, Amelie's voice was flat, final. I'm done running. She handed Eric the Glock and walked toward the front entrance, stepping over debris and spent shell casings. The massive oak doors had been blown off their hinges during the initial breach, leaving the entryway open to the pre-dawn darkness. Blue and red lights strobed across the gravel drive, painting the smoke in alternating colors. A bullhorn crackled to life. This is the Oslo Police Emergency Response Unit. The estate is surrounded. All occupants exit with your hands visible. You have 60 seconds to comply. Amelie walked through the ruined doorway into the light. She raised her hands slowly, deliberately, and stood in the center of the drive as armed officers emerged from behind their vehicles, rifles trained on her chest. And then she saw him. Martin stepped out from behind an armored van, dressed in tactical gear that looked freshly pressed despite the hour. His face was a careful mask of relief and concern, the performance of a man who'd spent 3 weeks desperately searching for his kidnapped fiancée. He walked toward her, and Amelie saw the exact moment he registered the change. She wasn't cowering, wasn't crying, wasn't the shattered woman he'd left bleeding on their kitchen floor. The blood on her clothes was someone else's. The steadiness in her gaze was earned through fire. Amelie, he said, his voice pitched perfectly for the officers surrounding them. Thank God, are you hurt? Did they? Stop. The word cut through his performance like a scalpel. I'm not doing this anymore. Martin's expression flickered, confusion, then calculation. He lowered his voice, speaking just for her. You're in shock. You don't understand what you've been through. These people brainwashed you. These people saved me from you. Amelie took a step closer, close enough to see the rage building behind his eyes. You shot me, Martin, staged it as a suicide. And when that failed, you made a deal with a Russian cartel to finish the job. That's insane. You're traumatized. Lund manipulated you. William answered the phone when I called for help. You pulled the trigger. Amelie's voice carried across the courtyard now, loud enough for every officer to hear. I have the bullet they removed from my abdomen. I have the medical records. And I have a very clear memory of you standing in our kitchen, telling me how you were going to make my death look like mental illness. Martin's jaw tightened. No one will believe you. You've been held hostage for 3 weeks by the most dangerous criminal in Norway. Stockholm Syndrome is documented. I called the wrong number, Amelie interrupted. But it was the right one after all, because the man who answered didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. He just said, "I'm on my way." And he kept that promise. She saw movement behind Martin, officers conferring, radios crackling. The narrative he'd built so carefully was starting to crack. They were listening now, really listening. "You're making a mistake," Martin said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm a decorated detective. You're a traumatized victim. Who do you think they'll believe?" Amélie smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression she'd ever worn. "I used to be the woman you shot, but 3 weeks ago you didn't just pull a trigger, Martin. You started a war. And the woman standing in front of you now," she leaned in close enough to see her reflection in his eyes, "I'm the one who won it." Behind her, Eric emerged from the estate carrying William on a stretcher, flanked by the surviving guards. William's leg was stabilized, his head bandaged, but his eyes were alert. He met Amélie's gaze across the courtyard, and something unspoken passed between them. The war wasn't over, but Martin Lawson had just lost the only battle that mattered, the one for the truth. And Amélie T. Danielson, former high school chemistry teacher, realized she wasn't going back to the woman she'd been. She was becoming something far more dangerous. The queen of a kingdom, built on ashes and blood.